Picture a dim evening street. His mother struggles with heavy bags while Dylan trails behind, too weak to help. Every step feels like a judgment. Whispers from neighbors sting louder than the wind. He'll never make it. In that moment, Dylan wasn't just weak. He was invisible. In the crowded gym, whistles blew and sneakers squeaked across the floor. But Dylan stood still, arms trembling, the basketball slipping from his fingers again and again. Laughter echoed, sharp and merciless, while teachers shook their heads as if he were a burden, not a student. In classrooms, his silence was heavier than words. When called to speak, his throat locked tight, his eyes fixed on the desk, and each failure etched another scar he couldn't hide. But beyond the school gates, there she was, his mother waiting patiently, her eyes filled with a hope too heavy for a boy to carry. She believed in a future he couldn't even imagine for himself. To the world, Dylan was fragile. To her, he was still unbroken. Yet inside, he felt trapped, caught between who he was and who he was expected to be. Nights at home were no softer than the days at school. Dylan would watch his mother under the dim light, needle in hand, carefully patching holes in his worn-out shirts. She made old fabric look new, disguising poverty with tenderness. He wanted to thank her, but the words stuck, heavy with shame. At dinner, she'd smile and say she wasn't hungry, sliding the larger portion toward his plate. He knew the truth. He could see her ribs under the thin fabric of her blouse, hear her stomach growl when she thought he wasn't listening. Every sacrifice she made felt like a mirror, reflecting his weakness back at him. To the world, she was invisible, just another tired mother fighting to keep her son afloat. But to Dylan, she was both shield and reminder. Her love protected him, yet it cut deep, whispering the question he couldn't escape. How long would he survive leaning on her? The house was silent, except for the faint rattle of the old kitchen window. Dylan was half asleep in his room when he heard it, his mother's voice low and broken. He crept down the hall, his bare feet brushing against the cold wooden floor, and stopped just outside the kitchen door. There she was, sitting at the small table with her head in her hands. Tears slipped down her cheeks, falling onto an unpaid bill she couldn't hide. Her whisper cut sharper than any insult he had ever faced. "He'll never make it without me." Those words froze him in place. For years he thought her sacrifices were proof of her unshakable faith. But in that fragile confession he heard something else: fear. Fear that her son wasn't strong enough to survive the world on his own. He pressed his back against the wall, his chest burning. Shame swallowed him whole. It wasn't the laughter of classmates or the labels that shattered him now. It was her doubt, the woman who had given up everything for him. In that moment, Dylan saw himself not as the boy she protected, but as the burden she quietly feared. And that truth tore him apart. The dawn light spilled through cracked curtains, but something inside Dylan had shifted forever. He rose from his bed not as the same fragile boy, but as someone burning with a new unshakable fire. His mother's words from the night before still echoed in his chest, a wound but also a spark. He stared into the mirror, studying the face that had always looked defeated. For the first time he clenched his fists, not in despair but in determination. "No more," he whispered. No more hiding behind her. No more excuses, no more being the boy who needed saving. At breakfast, his mother poured tea as if nothing had happened, but Dylan's silence was different now. His eyes carried something she had never seen before: resolve. She asked if he was all right. He only nodded, swallowing the storm raging inside. Walking to school, every step felt heavier yet stronger. He didn't look at the ground anymore. He looked forward as if daring the world to mock him again. Inside, he made a vow. He would build strength from weakness, courage from fear, and power from pain. That morning, Dylan wasn't just her boy. He was a flame ready to rise. Dylan's fire needed fuel, and he found it in the simplest of places, a box of cheap headphones bought with the few coins he had saved. They weren't special, but to him they were more than plastic and wires. They were his first chance to stand on his own. In the crowded school hallway, he moved nervously from locker to locker, voice shaky as he asked, "Do you need headphones?" $5. Each rejection stung like the laughter from the basketball court. Some brushed him off, others sneered. His hands trembled, his pride cracked, but he kept walking, kept asking. Then finally a classmate handed him a crumpled bill. Dylan placed the headphones in his hand. his heart pounding as if he had just conquered a mountain. That night, when he showed his mother the small profit, her tired face lit up. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't glory. It was proof. For the first time, Dylan saw her smile not out of pity but out of pride, and that was worth more than any dollar. The first sale was just a spark, but Dylan refused to let it fade. Soon his days became a blur of endless hustles. After school he scrubbed classrooms for extra pay. At night, he sold old gadgets online, staying awake until his eyes burned from the screen's glow. When others slept, he taught himself coding, taking tiny freelance jobs that barely paid a meal. Hunger became his shadow. There were nights when he skipped dinner so he could save a few more dollars, mornings when exhaustion made his hands shake as he typed. But Dylan didn't care. Every coin earned was more than money. It was proof that he was no longer helpless, no longer chained to weakness. His mother would peek into his room, watching him hunched over his laptop at 3 a.m. She wanted to tell him to rest, but she stayed quiet. Because for the first time she saw her son fighting, building, becoming. Each dollar wasn't just survival. It was a brick. And brick by brick, Dylan was building a new man, one the world would no longer dare to call weak. Years of sleepless nights finally began to bear fruit. At 19, Dylan wasn't just hustling for survival anymore. He had scraped together enough savings to take a leap. With trembling hands, he registered a small e-commerce store. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't grand, but it was his. A foundation built on hunger, rejection, and determination. Orders trickled in slowly at first, then faster, until Dylan could finally see numbers in his account that once felt impossible. Yet his proudest moment wasn't about profit. It was the day he walked into a store with his own earned money and bought his mother a brand new winter coat. He placed it on her shoulders carefully, almost afraid she'd push it away. But instead her eyes filled with tears, not of sacrifice this time, but of pride. Those tears became Dylan's first real trophy, proof that he could finally give back, proof that the boy once called weak was learning how to stand. That coat wasn't just fabric. It was a symbol. A son's first gift, born not out of dependence, but out of strength. Dylan's small store was finally gaining momentum, and with growth came new faces, people who smiled, shook his hand, and promised loyalty. Among them was a partner he trusted like a brother, someone who spoke the language of ambition as if they shared the same heartbeat. Together they planned bigger orders, wider reach, a brighter future. But shadows often wear friendly masks. One morning Dylan logged into his account and felt the ground vanish beneath him. The funds were gone. His partner had emptied everything, leaving behind nothing but unpaid suppliers and angry customers demanding refunds. The humiliation was worse than the debt. Whispers spread fast. The boy who couldn't stand on his own had failed again. Every cruel label from his past came rushing back. For days Dylan sat in silence, staring at the empty space where his dream once stood. His mother watched him with worried eyes, fearing this betrayal would break him for good. And deep inside, Dylan wrestled with the oldest voice of all. The whisper that maybe she had been right, maybe he couldn't make it without her. The betrayal left Dylan hollow. Nights once filled with work now felt like endless hours of silence. His mother, seeing his sunken eyes and shaking hands, couldn't bear it any longer. One evening she sat across from him at their small kitchen table and pleaded softly, "Son, please stop, before this world destroys you completely." Her words came from love, but to Dylan they carried the weight of surrender. He saw the fear in her eyes, the same fear he'd overheard years ago when she whispered that he'd never survive without her. Now she was asking him to step back into that shadow, to accept weakness as his destiny. His voice trembled, not from doubt, but from determination. "If I quit now," he whispered, "I'll remain the boy you feared I'd always be." The sentence shook the air between them, sharp as a blade, but it was the truth he couldn't hold back. Tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to shield him, but she also saw something different, the fire that no betrayal could kill. For Dylan, this wasn't just about business anymore. It was survival of his spirit, a battle against the chains of his past. He chose comeback. Dylan didn't just return. He rose, scarred but unbroken. Every failure from the past became his blueprint. He studied late into the night, dissecting where he went wrong, reshaping his vision with sharper edges. The boy once mocked for weakness now carried fire in his veins and nothing could put it out. This time, he built differently, smarter. He launched a platform that wasn't just about selling, it was about solving problems others ignored. The growth was slow, then sudden, then unstoppable. Orders multiplied. His phone buzzed with opportunity instead of rejection. Investors who once overlooked him now leaned forward, drawn not only to his numbers but to his resilience. They didn't just see a business, they saw a fighter who turned scars into fuel. His mother watched from the sidelines, her fear melting into pride. For the first time, she didn't see a fragile boy hiding behind her. She saw a man who could carry both himself and her. From ashes, Dylan didn't just rebuild. He ignited. The boy once mocked as Mama's boy now stood under blinding lights, cameras flashing, the world calling his name. His company had grown beyond borders. His face graced magazine covers. His fortune touched billions. Yet in that moment, surrounded by power and applause, Dylan's eyes searched for only one person. In the front row sat his mother, older now, her hands trembling with emotion. As the crowd roared, Dylan stepped down from the stage. He didn't raise his trophy high. He knelt beside her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Your fear made me strong. Your love made me unstoppable." Her tears spilled, but they weren't the tears of sacrifice anymore. They were tears of fulfillment, of knowing the boy she once feared would never survive had now carried the world, and her, on his shoulders. In that moment, Dylan wasn't just a billionaire. He was still her son. Dylan's journey proves weakness is never final. It's the soil where strength is born. His mother's fear became his fire, her love his fuel. If pain could turn a fragile boy into an unstoppable man, what might it awaken in you? Subscribe and claim your strength story.